Hi, this is Dean Webb with networking-forums.com. Normally, creating a firewall rule is a simple thing to do. What happens when it doesn't work the way you thought it would? We're going to take a look at that. Let's start off with a simple enough rule. A customer gives me a source address and a destination address and says, let all the traffic go through to it. I don't like that. I want to be able to permit only the necessary traffic. So I need to get some port numbers from this customer. So where do I get these port numbers? Well, if it's a common service like Windows File and Print services, for example, I can look at online knowledge bases. They're going to have lots of good information there. If it's vendor-specific services, we can go to the vendor documentation. Hopefully it's online so I can look at it, but frequently it's going to be offline. The customer has the only copy of it and he's got to make sense of it. In a worst case scenario, we figure out what ports to open because we monitor it via firewall logs. So let's say in this example, the customer's consulted with his documentation and he says, okay, I need ports 80, 443, 7000, and 7050. Then I have to ask, do you want TCP or UDP? It does make a difference to the firewall. But let's say the customer is fortunate, he was able to look up and find out, oh, these are all TCP ports. Great, that's what we need. So I've built out the rule as you see here with the ports permitted, and I ask him to test. Let's say it doesn't work. Okay, well, I'm not going to panic. What I'm going to do is follow a set of steps that's going to find out what's going on here so we get the proper traffic permitted. It could be my fault, it could be his fault. Let's find out. I've got a list of some common reasons for failure here, not the uncommon ones. Who knows what those could be? But basically they fall into three categories. Your fault, the fault of the networking device, the customer's fault, or the vendor documentation fault. And I don't want you to use this to blame another guy, but rather to see where do you need to make the corrective action. Now, really, before you even start writing the firewall rule, you should make sure you have it on the correct firewall and the correct interface of that firewall. If not, way to go, genius. You've got some work to do. Now, if you have firewall maintenance or config management tools, they can be a big help in this step, where they can go through and find out which firewall exactly is the one to use for this traffic. If multiple firewalls are involved, perhaps, this will let you know. It'll also say if the objects for the rules exist and if the rule itself already exists somewhere. If you've got a firewall that has over 500 rules on it and you just add another rule rather than check through all those rules to see if it's there, the config management is going to let you know if you've already got that job done for you. Make sure you've defined correct traffic in the correct direction, of course, and if the source traffic is from a less trusted zone and it's going to a more trusted zone for the destination, you may need to create a rule that actually permits that traffic to come on in. And it's going to be a flip, a mirror of the original rule, where the source port will be the destination from the other rule, along with the destination ports, and then the destination address will be the sources of the other rule, and the destination ports will probably be any, because clients tend to use a randomly generated port for the traffic in some cases, and it'll all be destined towards a specific port. So you just flip that around and you should be good to go. Another issue I've seen involves routing issues. I have to remember firewalls are also often routers. So I looked in the routing tables to see if that source and destination traffic is going to get to where it needs to be, and I've had to add routes before. Sometimes the routing needs to come in through a different interface than what other traffic comes and goes on in the firewall. Make that change. An example may be a monitoring station that has to go to a management interface instead of the front side interface. Or you may have a manufacturing system that's got to communicate with a segmented environment over a specific interface that may be isolated from other traffic according to the routing rules. So get creative, look in those routing tables and see what may need to be fixed there. If the traffic involved is security traffic, chances are you may have an IPS blocking that traffic if it happens to sit along the route. Security devices are always very suspicious of other security devices. They're going to block each other unless you create specific exemptions. So if you have an IPS that sits on the traffic flow, look to see if there's blocking in its logs, and if so, make that exception to permit this traffic. Then you should be good with that. So those previous slides take care of your due diligence. Now you need to find out about the customer side of things. When you ask, what's the IP address of the device you're using for testing, if he gives you an address that wasn't one in the original rule, chances are they've got multiple workstations that will generate this traffic, and this is a good time to have the customer give you those addresses so you can get them in there. There may also be multiple IP addresses of that system that they're trying to reach. Look at traffic in the firewall logs. See where the client traffic is trying to hit the destination traffic, and if you need to, open up additional addresses for it. And also there are port issues. Sometimes the customer doesn't know what to use, and he's got old documentation or incomplete vendor documentation. So you're going to have to monitor the traffic on the firewall to see where this is trying to go and what ports it's trying to use so you can open them up later. Now, monitoring the traffic can either be easy or hard. I love when I'm looking at a new firewall that's got real-time traffic displays, and I can filter that traffic and find exactly what I'm looking for. I hate it when I have to use those legacy firewalls where I just have to keep pumping F5 and there's no way to filter this information. But I'm the expert. I've got to work with what I have. And what I want to do is I want to find traffic from the source of the destination that's being blocked. If the other stuff is getting through, that's great. I'm happy for it. But if it still doesn't work, obviously it's something that's getting blocked that's keeping that application from working. So here's how we find it. Now, I have found a trick on that supposedly no filter system where I have to keep hitting refresh. If I create a rule that will deny traffic from the source of the destination, it's going to create a rule that will only hit on that traffic. So instead of having to wade through the deny any all list of hits, I find just some very specific ones, and that helps me to zone in on those ports faster. Now, it may not catch everything that I need to catch if there's additional sources or additional destinations, but it will help in tracking down those additional ports that I need to find. With the more modern firewalls that allow for real-time traffic monitoring, you're able to get better information and be able to say to the customer, hey, test it now, and be able to see the success and failure of that test by looking at what's getting blocked and what's getting through. Sometimes I want to have full information and see all the traffic. Other times I want to filter and just get the error information or the warning information about traffic being blocked. And specifically, when we do these filters on the traffic, either by source or by destination, we're looking for other ports being used, other IP addresses that need to be considered in this traffic flow. We need to also be able to see is return traffic being blocked. You may want to have the destination address put in as a source address filter to see all of its traffic getting out. If the source is too chatty, you may want to filter to where it's just between that source and that destination, so only that traffic is being tracked. But definitely having a real-time monitor is a huge, huge help in being able to troubleshoot these issues, and you will find those ports that need to be used pretty dang quickly. A frequent reason for blocked ports is when a customer asks for the start and end point of a port range but doesn't actually ask for a port range. And this is where monitoring that traffic in real time is going to allow you to see that, hey, our customer asked for TCP 7000 and TCP 7050, but I see a lot of block traffic on TCP 7001, TCP 7002, TCP 7003. In fact, the client is going through all these ports until it gets to TCP 7050, but it may have already timed out before then. Okay, so if I go back and say, hey, let's put in that port range for 7000 to 7050, now try it. Hey, it works great. Good, we needed the port range. Some apps are going to have massive port range needs. If you look at Windows Active Directory services, there are some huge port ranges that it needs to have open. Oracle databases, I believe they can go anywhere from port 1024 up to port 5000, depending on the product and application. So sometimes you've got to go a little deeper, and when you see those ports being blocked in between others, you may not see all the ports being blocked, but you realize there's a port range in effect here. When I open up the whole thing, even though I didn't observe every single port getting hit, I know that over time they will be used, and that port range is going to save me some grief later on. In my experience, one of those solutions from a previous slide will do the trick. However, there are times where it's still not working. I've got to dig a little deeper. Is it possible that the rule has been shadowed by a deny rule set further up? If so, clearing that out is going to help out a lot. Changing the rule order is what I'll do there. Having that firewall management utility is, again, going to be a huge bonus here, where I can have it overview the rule set and maybe examine it to see if any rules are being shadowed and possibly blocked that way. If web traffic is involved, could a proxy server be hijacking things and trying to do something with that traffic? Take a look there. Is there a router in between that has an ACL that affects traffic? You'll have to track that down. Uh, and then, is the destination system up and running? Can you ping it from the firewall? And not just ping it, but can you also do a ping based on a TCP port on appropriate port to see if it responds there? Sometimes you can ping it. It's up there, but somebody shut down that service, and it's not going to respond, and therefore the client activity is going to be futile. You'll have to tell that team, hey, get your server fixed, and then we'll test that rule again. Do you have to have account permissions involved? This is really elaborate. I can ping the server. I could ping it on the port it's waiting to receive information on. The user connects, and he's getting rejected. Well, if I can get a remote control or a remote viewing of what's happening on that customer desktop, I can see, okay, you are connecting, you are on that port, you made a full connection to that system, and it told you take a hike because your account doesn't work. So the solution there is not going to be fix it on the firewall, it's going to be fix it in the Active Directory, fix it on the account permissions with that application. But again, if you have a really hairy issue, look at what's happening to the customer. See if you can reproduce the issue yourself from your own workstation, and that'll give you a deeper understanding of what may be going on. In my experience, if I haven't made a bonehead mistake and put the rule on the wrong firewall, it is usually the customer that has left off an endpoint, or maybe they did a typo when they submitted the rule to me, or they left out a port that needs to be used. Always be patient with your customers. It's not their job to be the networking expert, that's your job. And that means it's your job to make sure that you can communicate effectively to them so they can give you the information you need to put together the right firewall rule. With patience and with following some procedures that you've already got listed out in your mind, you can get to that conclusion more rapidly than if you run around in a panic or point fingers at the proxy server guy or any number of other things that just don't really solve the problem. Anyway, if you want to talk more about firewalls or networking in general, come by www.networking-forums.com, and there's a lot of really great people there ready to give you a lot of really great advice. For networking-forums.com, I'm Dean Webb. Bye for now.